Okay, so today we're looking at the GoPro Hero 9, and most importantly what we're looking at is shutter speed and the effects it has on movement. Now, a slower shutter speed, typically referred to as the 180-degree shutter angle rule, or the cinematic look, as people will tell you, at 24 frames per second, which we are in now. Then I would want to use a shutter of 1/48, or at least that's what they say that you should do. I'm actually kind of an advocate for stopping this idea of cinematic settings in an action camera. I don't think that it always turns out best, and I don't think it's really good information for a lot of the new users of cameras, videographers, and GoPros in general. So I think there's a lot of bad information out there. So hopefully this video is going to assist you in determining whether or not you really want to follow so many of these cinematic settings that people tell you about. Okay, so right now I am in cinematic settings. I've got a shutter 1/48. I'm shooting in 24 frames per second. My white balance is in native and my ISO max is 100. Now, some of these settings I'm okay with, but there does need to be an explanation of why 24 frames a second and why the 1/48. Now, we're still using a flat color profile and we're using a native white balance just for these shots right here, and we're in 24 frames per second. But if you notice, I'm better exposed now. Now, of course, if I wanted to expose the previous shot, I would have had to have used an ND filter. Now, ND filters, they can work and they can be good if you really know what you're doing. But the thing is, you are putting another lens and also degrading your footage ever so slightly when you use them. Now, when you want to know how do I make that cinematic look, I'm going to be honest with you. Most of it's not in these camera settings. Most of it is just being a good colorist and being able to color grade good, or just slapping on a LUT. But the 24 frames per second, the 180-degree shutter rule, that does need a little discussion, because a lot of people just say to do it, oh, more natural motion blur, but they don't really explain the reason and the why and the history behind these frame rates, and also the 180 shutter degree rule. Now, we're not going to go a whole lot into that, but I do want to talk a little bit about frame rates, which we're going to do right now. Okay, so now I'm in GoPro color with an auto shutter and a white balance that is set to 5000 Kelvin. So how much better or worse does this look from the previous shot? And we'll talk a little bit now about why 24 frames per second and how did that even come about? Is it really more cinematic? Okay, so now we're in a flat color profile. So why 24 frames per second? Well, originally, actually, if you wanted to make a cinematic film, back in the silent film days, you would have been recording in 16 frames per second. But then when the Fitaphone came out, which allowed for talkie movies, they needed to be able to sync the sound to the film, and so they had to increase the frame rate of the film to 24 frames per second. Now, this became the standard because that's what worked, and so for many, many, many years, 24 frames per second is what you saw when you went to the theater. However, that isn't always the case today. Not only is it not the case today in all movies, it's also not what you see when you watch a TV program. You see, when TV started being produced, then they started filming in 30 frames per second to match the refresh rate of the TV, the standard TV of 30 hertz. Then, as we moved into computer monitors and into your 4K TVs, the refresh rate was increased. Generally, it's in 60 hertz, 90 hertz, 120 hertz, but you're not going to find many quality TVs or monitors that are using a refresh rate of 30 hertz, and definitely not 24. So I think it's megahertz, but regardless. So typically, if you want your video to look the best on the medium of today's TVs or monitors or even phones, then you should be recording in 60 frames per second, or even 30, but you really don't want to be in 24 frames per second because that doesn't look right with the refresh rate of these monitors. So can you do 24 frames per second? Well, we're doing it right now and it probably looks fine, but are you really benefiting that much? Is it really that much more cinematic? Probably not. Now the rest of this video is going to be in 24 frames per second because that's how we've started it off, and I want to keep it consistent throughout. But the main focus that we're going to be looking at is the cinematic movement and motion blur, and also the effect it has on the stabilization in the camera itself. Now typically it's always been the best practice to have a shutter of at least 1/240 and faster to get the best stabilization out of your camera, or at least out of your GoPro or a digitally stabilized camera, where 1/120 is kind of the in-between. You still get stabilization, it's just not quite as good. So we're going to run a bunch of tests right now, and we're going to check out how does it look, the difference between a 24 frames per second, or 1/24, 1/96, and faster shutters, and then you can be the judge to decide, does it really make that much of a difference, and is it something that you should really concern yourself with that much. Now right now, currently, what's my shutter? I don't even know. What's my ISO? I don't even know that either. What I've done is spot metered using the touch exposure value balancing on the back of the GoPro Hero 9, and typically actually that's the way that I get the best footage, is just having that spot meter activated. So it's a quick, easy way to change your settings without having to fiddle around with ISOs, shutters, and the rest. So anyway, here we go. Okay, so we're just going to do a little bit of stabilization testing. Now this is with the shutter of 1/48. We're going to start off with my skateboard here, my little surf skate, my Carver. So it should be pretty smooth when we first start off, and then we'll do a little running around. I'm going to try to keep this brief, but if all goes well, or as expected I should say, there should be considerably more motion blur, which does help give a sense of speed, but the downfall to that is we should also see a little bit less stabilization and maybe some unwanted blur that comes along with it. So let's go ahead and get started with this. Okay, so this time we're going to use our 180-degree cinematic shutter rule and do our run. Okay, so now I have increased the shutter speed to 1/192, which should be a little bit better for our stabilization. I raised the max ISO to 200 because 100 was a little darker, and I'm trying to match it to the previous. Okay, so now we're going to do a shutter of 1/192. Okay, so now we've increased the shutter speed to 1/384, And we're just gonna ride down and take a look at this. Okay, now for this test, we raised the max ISO to 400, and this is shutter 1/384. Okay, so now we're going to use linear plus horizon leveling, but with just an auto shutter and an ISO max of 400. Okay, so this time, the only difference that we have here is I've used the touch exposure balance on the back of the LCD and then locked it to the top of the screen, to the sky up here. So it should be giving us a fast shutter and a low ISO, but that would be the only changes that I'm doing from the auto default. So here we go. Okay, so now we're going to try this out, EV -2, and with an auto shutter ISO max of 400. Okay, and finally, even though we know it's going to be blown out, this is shutter 1/24 with a max ISO of 100. And this is with linear and horizon lock. Okay, so this is the setting I most typically use, although I often use the GoPro color. This is flat. The white balance is locked at 5,000 Kelvin. It was locked for all of these at 5,000 Kelvin. The shutter is on auto and the EV is -1. I'll have to go home and take a look at all this and see, was I right? Was I wrong? Maybe the new GoPro HERO9 can stabilize with a slower shutter. I don't know. But we'll find out. Hopefully this was helpful to you. Please subscribe, leave a comment down below. Any questions or any comments or thoughts on future videos and what you'd like to see. Until next time, take care, have fun, and be good.